Warning: the CIA just lost control of the Antarctica Signal. They lost it. After the 2025 surge, the CIA's polar jammers went quiet, and the heartbeat kept pulsing. We pulled the raw seismo-acoustic from a polar array. The frequency train matches the sphere network signatures independent trackers logged since 2024. Same intervals, same contraction, same lock cycles. That's your proof. Here's what changed while everyone said calibration. Within 48 hours, Space Force expanded a quiet no-fly shell over Ross and Dome C. Polar flights curved around rectangles nobody named. 2 commercial satellites logged sudden attitude corrections on Polar Pass, their polar tiles never published. Contractors we called were told to stop asking about Type 0. Several never picked up again. The part nobody can spin. The heartbeat isn't broadcasting, it's counting down. Interval contraction tracks trilateration lock across layers, ground mid-orbital, like a continental survey net knitting tight. If that convergence hits 0, something shifts above us and under ice. This isn't theory, the math sits in the waveform. To see how we got here, rewind to when the hum was just a nuisance. One analyst heard rhythm in the trash, and the ground quietly took control of the sky. The contamination, first contact with the grid. It started as a background itch. Winter 2025, field teams along the Ross flank logged a subaudible hum in their sensor trash. Steady, boring, easy to blame on wind. Comms techs added foam, logged environmental, and moved on. The hum didn't. In January it began to breathe, soft rises and falls that felt less like weather and more like timing. 3,000 miles away, in a room without windows or a listed floor, a CIA signals analyst everyone called Vance fed the noise into an old habit: crossbin trash. He stacked polar station dumps against civilian Skywatch feeds, added open ADSB polar traces, then layered in those luminous spheres. Independent trackers had finally clustered without getting laughed out of rooms. He didn't care what they were, he cared when they moved. The windows lined up. On weeks when the hum tightened, mid-altitude lanes, the ones trackers called Type 2, paced Southern Ocean corridors like rails. 2 nights later, equilateral formations at polar longitudes, Type 1, settled into slow, steady geometry. Ground hovers near generators, Type 3, spiked during the narrowest windows. Vance overlaid the hum's intervals on the sightings. The matches landed within seconds. He tried to break it. New weeks, other stations, opposite flanks. Same alignment. Then the weird part. Ground arrays at McMurdo and the plateau showed repeatable harmonics in their echo returns. Thin ripples in ice profiles that hadn't been there a month earlier. Fingerprinting the carrier tone against those ripples put them within a rounding error of the hum. While that was happening over the ice, pilots on polar corridors began filing notes that never made NOTAMs. Short instrument drift over waypoint, gentle disorientation during pass, and one line no one knew where to put. Blue light. No skin. Gone. Controllers cleared quiet bends around rectangles nobody named. Dead straight tracks started to curve. Vance carried printouts into a small room and said 3 words that broke the air. The ground's in charge. He wasn't guessing. Trilateration looks like geometry. It's really timing, phase precision between points that solves for where and when. GPS gives you time from above. The pattern inverted. Pulses rising from below, sky nodes answering, ground sensors recording lock. He wrote Type 0 over the bottom layer because if the sky stacked at 1-3, something under ice had to be calling tempo. Meanwhile, a British borehole team near the coast kept tripping clean right angles in subsurface reflections. Not a crevasse, not melt. Orthogonal repeats that survived kit rotation and software scrubs. An official geologist glanced at the plots and said processing artifact. The team lead smiled, exported raw, and handed a drive to a friend. 3 days later, a weather overlay blinked off above a slice of Ross for 10 minutes. Publicly, nothing. Quietly, a Space Force convoy pushed inland and raised portable mast arrays with grounding you don't waste on exercises. Local contractors were told the snowpack was unstable. They were told to stay out. The hum compressed. Vance mapped intervals over 8 weeks. The windows narrowed like a metronome speeding toward a downbeat. Each contraction got a tag. Type 3 hovers clustering at generator banks. Type 2 lanes braiding over corridors. Type 1 triangles knitting a shell. He didn't write activation. He wrote state change imminent. Then he went missing for 90 days. On the ice, the human moments drew the line straighter. A mechanic felt his coffee tremble at peak hum and watched the wall clock skip a second. He laughed until the comms bay lights flickered in time. He wrote the interval on his hand. 2 minutes and 11 seconds. Later, he scrubbed his own video. One dropped frame. Same second. A pilot on a supply hop took a detour he couldn't justify. Fuel fell into the yellow. He landed tight and kept the cockpit audio. On playback, a low throb rose right before he swung wide. Too low to hear in flight, obvious when slowed. He drew a circle on his chart where it felt strongest. It overlapped the British grid's right angles. Back in Utah, Vance called from a kitchen that sounded like night. Type 0, he said. He'd gone backward through Cold War noise, Queen Maud Land ice cube taps that burned out coils without heat, then forward through Space Force AI doctrine that suddenly prioritized anomaly detection in orbital layers, then across citizen logs that looked random until a heartbeat stitched them together. He had 2 rules now. 1. The grid contaminated us the moment the ground joined in. 2. Once the ground set tempo, jamming above wouldn't matter. People around him said extraterrestrial. Vance said architecture, because the more he mapped, the less it looked like visitation, and the more it resembled maintenance. Calibration sweeps, lock cycles, synchronization between nodes that only had to show once Earth's noise floor forced a retune. That's when he said the line that cost him friends. The hum's a heartbeat, he told me. Heartbeat means timing. Timing means lock. Lock means control. The next morning, Space Force widened the shell again. Flights bent farther. In the seismo-acoustic file we weren't supposed to have, the interval shaved 1 more notch towards 0. The leak, what Type 0 actually is. When Vance finally laid it out, he didn't draw a saucer or a base. He drew a clock. Not the kind that ticks in your kitchen, the kind that makes other clocks obey. Type 0, he said, isn't a transmitter in the way you think about antennas. It's a supervisor clock under ice. It sets the beat. Everything else, types 1 through 3, rephases to that beat and does the work. He walked me through the logic on a napkin he kept folding into quarters. Trilateration looks like triangles on a map, but it lives or dies on timing. GPS solves your position because your receiver hears precise time from space and calculates how late it arrived. In Antarctica, the chain inverted. Pulses rose from the ground. Seconds later, mid-altitude corridors formed in cadence. A few seconds after that, high triangles knitted into geometry overhead. Ground sensors recorded lock, tiny phase closures and echo returns, like a survey net closing its solution. His proof wasn't one file you could dismiss as a glitch. It was 3 families of evidence that shared a fingerprint. First, the inverted timing stack. Pulse windows opened below, sky answered above, ground recorded lock. Second, harmonics that didn't belong in ice. The orthogonal ripples radar teams kept finding, repeatable across kit swaps and angles, with carrier tones that matched the hum within a rounding error. Third, the interval contraction curve itself, clean, exponential shave, toward a predicted 0 that matched known lock cycle math at continental scale. Then the leak landed, just 1 line in a contractor's email, forwarded twice and flagged "Do not persist." The algorithm writing those pulses wasn't fixed. It was adaptive. Type 0 shortened or widened its interval based on environmental noise, our noise. Satellites, radars, laser crosslinks, a roaring mesh of human transmissions bleeding upward. When clutter rose, the clock shaved milliseconds to regain phase. Noise canceling at planetary scale. That reframed the whole story. Agencies said interference and calibration. Vance said architecture reacting to a loud planet. Not an invasion. A retune. They think alien, he told me, flat as weather. I think old. Not temples. Not myths. Infrastructure that never had to show itself until we filled low Earth orbit with routers and started screaming in every band. What nobody wanted to admit, if the clock lives below, jammers above are theater. You can pour power into a band and dirty a slice of spectrum. You don't move time. We watched that in March. Classified platform spikes, heartbeat slips 4 milliseconds, then clicks back like a metronome that doesn't take requests. The sky followed the beat, not the blast. Meanwhile, the physical crumbs under ice kept agreeing with the math. Thermal nodes that slid a degree in phase with windows, not tides. Metalliferous flecks in core cuttings that snapped into microalignment under controlled sweeps. then released, as if their lattice wanted to phase with something outside. Distributed acoustic sensing on logistics fibers catching whisper-thin pip trains, walking orthogonal paths during narrow windows. Each piece contestable alone. Together, a map. That's when Vance sketched the hubs. He didn't write base. He wrote hub, rounded triangles fed by orthogonal routes threading under shelves we all know by name. He didn't give me coordinates. He gave me behaviors. Pulses arrived earliest at one corner, latest at another, laying a phase slope you could solve like a surveyor. Type 3 hovers stacked near generator banks when the interval pinched. Type 2 lanes braided over established corridors in steps of 9 nautical miles per pulse. Type 1 triangles densified at polar longitudes, baselines shrinking in lockstep with the beat. If you're looking for intention, you look at what answers time. We press the leak hard because belief doesn't hold up in court. 2 imaging providers admitted, off record, to brief attitude trims on polar pass inside predicted windows. No root cause identified, then stopped returning calls. Public polar tiles swapped to under review, exactly when the pain held steady. A seismo-acoustic station posted minute res traces that showed pulse edges clean enough to cut paper. We overlaid everything. Time lined up. Vance never sold health claims, but he didn't ignore bodies as sensors. Station staff wrote brief disorientation during narrow windows. Pilots bent around rectangles and only heard the throb when they slowed cockpit audio. A mechanic's wall clock skipped a second at peak and reconciled later. Thin data. Too many confounds. Still, the curve. Symptoms rode the beat. He labeled the outcomes, not the motives. Call it a defense grid if you need a box, because the behavior looks like protection at scale, masking outbound leakage in deep space bands during windows, biasing relays over corridors that couple to space, stacking audits where phase matters at the surface. But protection at one scale feels like pressure at another. Flights burn extra fuel around boxes nobody names. Tiles go missing. Maintenance zones rattle guts for 15 minutes, then stop. What happens at 0? He wouldn't guess. He listed only what the data could carry. Orbital reconfiguration, triangles anchor a new net. Signal mask, deep space floors dip on schedule and stay quiet between. Defense posture, synchronized layers damp bursts when collision risk spikes. All 3 require one thing first. The ground clock owns the beat. Type 0 isn't talking, he said. It's counting. That's the part agencies can't spin, because it's not a mood. It's a math problem. Windows narrow. Responses stack. Phase closes. And when the pain holds, geometry stops improvising and behaves like a system that just flipped a state. 1950s Ice Cube, the first failed tap. To understand why Type 0 felt familiar to Vance, you have to go back to when Antarctica was still a blank on maps and every blank was a battlefield. Mid-1950s, before the treaty made everybody polite, quiet listening posts sprouted along Queen Maud Land with civilian covers over military bones. The codename that survived the shredders sounded harmless, Ice Cube. On paper, Ice Cube was acoustic housekeeping, early attempts to extend subdetection into polar margins years before SOSUS matured. The kits were simple. Hydrophones lowered into leads, low-temp amplifiers, magnetic loops buried shallow in firn, cables wandering to warm shacks where coffee froze against the panes. Nobody briefed operators on extraterrestrials. They were told to hear Soviet steel. The first sign they'd set their ears on the wrong thing arrived as a smell. Not burning, ozone after lightning. Then meters that refused to behave. Amplifiers browned out without heat. Coils sang at tones you can't hear, thin as needles. A crew popped a junction box and found paraffin potting bubbled and rehardened in ripples, as if flexed by a field, not cooked by current. A memo that still circulates as a ghost copy labeled it non-thermal interference. Another logged equipment mortality. 6 units, 3 days, identical failure curves without overload events. Operators named their invisible culprit the cold hand. They tried distance, moved a loop 2 kilometers inland. Same song, narrowband tone riding just below bandpass, drifting like a metronome no one set. It's easy to miss how close they came. In 1956, nobody was modeling a ground-source timing lattice. They were radios in a storm, blaming the kit. Replace coils. Swap tubes. Thicken shielding. The curves mocked them. In one annotation, an engineer sketched a sign tightening into pulses over 4 nights, each night a few seconds shorter. He wrote one word in the margin, heartbeat. They didn't publish. They stapled it under classification and went home when storms erased tracks. Still, fragments bled out. An expedition doctor noting dizziness in 2 riggers during a magnetic flicker. A supply request asking for non-ferrous cabling without reason. A telegram advising a sister station to avoid a tap site vector. Unknown field present. Then a bigger story ate the small one. Deep freeze matured. The International Geophysical Year brought flags, press, the treaty shared science. Ice Cube folded into tidier programs with respectable names. The Cold War learned to look down from orbit instead. But facts age well. When? Vance dug those memos from a digitized carton. He didn't see folklore. He saw a timing field punishing crude ears. Gear built to listen for propellers had stuck its fingers in a metronome and got slapped. The non-thermal signature matched what modern arrays recorded when the hum crested decades later. No heat, rapid drift, harmonics that don't belong in ice. Meanwhile, 3 days after a recorded pulse train in 1958, a polar overflight logged compass jitter over a rectangle of ice nobody had mapped. A week later, a different aircraft circled wide without writing why. Pilots didn't talk orbs then. They wrote heavy air and radios that went honest again once they cleared the box. Lay those old rectangles over Vance's hub map, and the overlap gets uncomfortable. The pilot bends sit inside the rounded triangles he now labels hubs. The heartbeat curve from a 195's engineer, crude as it is, shows the same contraction cadence, only coarser. And that ion smell in the shack. Modern station notes use a drier phrase, ion scent during narrow windows. There's a quieter echo in doctrine. When Space Force formalized anomaly detection and wrote passive observation into polar playbooks, you could hear Ice Cube in the footnotes. Avoid injecting power into unknown fields. Prefer passive ears. Ground well. The playbook didn't say why. The old memos did. They also explain why jammers don't win. Ice Cube teaches the wrong lesson fast. In a timing field, more power is just louder wrong. Those operators drove closer, broadened band, and found the edge where phase stress flips fragile components into failure. If you felt your fillings hum near a high-power radar, you know the category, wrong tool, right wound. The human pieces belong here, because bodies are sensors whether anyone funds them. One rigger's headache that matched the tightening pulses. A tech dizzy for 5 minutes during a flicker, fine after coffee. Thin anecdotes, but the timing sits on the beat. Vance doesn't call it harm. He calls it proximity. Maintenance zones don't ask permission. So the first failed tap wasn't a failure. It was a prologue. It proved there was something to touch, and that crude ears can't stand inside a clock. Then the world got busy and forgot. The heartbeat didn't. It waited under ice while we filled low Earth orbit with routers and made enough noise to force a retune. Look at the pattern through that lens, and the 195's read like the first warning label. Don't push power at time. Don't confuse silence with absence. If you insist on listening with the wrong kind of attention, the metronome answers by tightening the beat until your gear leaves. Ice Cube stopped tapping. The hum kept time, and when the countdown reappeared 70 years later, it sounded exactly like something old quietly reclaiming the clock. 2025 to 2026, the surge no one could spin. You could chart the change without a single press release. Through spring 2025, the hum sat under daily noise. Irritating, measurable, survivable. Then the incidents stacked where polite language runs out. Out on the Ross flank, echo traces that used to meander compressed into clean pulse trains. On, off, at intervals that ignored weather and shift changes. Dome C picked up the same step pattern cadence, like something underneath had switched from idle to clock. While that lived in the ice, orbit got uncomfortable. 2 imaging platforms on Polar Pass recorded transient loss of fine pointing. Tiny attitude trims that shouldn't happen in clear sky, followed by frames the public never saw. Providers blamed solar weather. The solar indices didn't agree. Internal notes used a different word, anomalies coincident with windowed interference. 3 days later, pilots on polar corridors wrote lines that controllers didn't want on radio. Short drift in headings near waypoint, recovered. Instrument lag during pass, no turbulence. One cockpit audio caught a low throb, just before the captain requested a gentle reroute around a square that didn't exist on charts. He couldn't justify it without sounding superstitious. The controller cleared it as icing, on a night so clean the stars felt close. Civilian trackers, ignored until denial gets expensive, watched the sky stop improvising. Type 2 corridors formed broad arcs pacing naval staging routes farther north than usual. Type 1 triangles appeared at higher cadence over polar longitudes, holding equilateral spacing with the steadiness that turns skeptics into mathematicians. Type 3 hovers doubled near station generators at exactly the minutes the hum narrowed. Independent teams time-stamped everything. Windows matched within seconds. Vance had already drawn it on a board. Seeing it land on instruments burns doubt out of a room. A contractor running a microwave package out of a coastal camp recorded bursts, aligning with pulse windows down to the second. He assumed interference until 3 separate sweeps at 3 separate elevations came back with the same cadence. He sent plots to a boss and got a reply that wasn't words, just a highlighted non-disclosure clause. Publicly, the story stayed small. A weather overlay blink off over a slice of Ross, a line in a catalog about temporal coverage gaps, 2 rerouted flights with bland explanations. Backchannel vocabulary changed, surge density, window contraction, nodes sync. And trucks moved at night. Portable masts rose inland with grounding you don't waste on experiments. Badges stopped opening doors they opened last week. Soil instability, said the laminated cards. Everyone who's done this work knows the difference between geology and schedule. Sensors everywhere noticed the same pivot. The hum's smooth rise fractured into discrete pulses with edges you could set a metronome to. Microwave and short gamma spikes clustered inside those edges, not random sizzle, timed emissions. Cross-checks between rigs showed alignment. A careful group posted a preprint about cryoseismic modulation by unknown periodic forcing, then withdrew it a week later. Author withdrew is a phrase that tells more than it hides. Then came the moment jammers died without ceremony. In March 2025, during a planned window, a classified platform pushed power into a band we won't name. The heartbeat slid a breath, milliseconds, and resumed like a tide. In the seismo-acoustic we weren't supposed to see, the next pulse landed 4 milliseconds early. The sky answered that beat. Type 2 lanes tightened, Type 1 triangles densified over the limb, Type 3 hovers stacked near generator banks like a checklist being walked. The official posture didn't blink. A spokesperson praised resilience in polar operations. Flight tracks bent farther around rectangles no one will own. Satellite catalogs posted missing tiles with language about calibration. The word Type 0 moved from rumor to contract clause. Contractors who asked why found their access polygons remapped. Those who kept asking found their badges quiet. It stopped being a spike. It became a baseline. Incident density held higher over Ross and Dome C. The windows kept shaving toward a line Vance had labeled 0 in pencil weeks earlier. 2 separate vendors acknowledged brief attitude trims during those panes, then told us not to call back. Station logs, the humankind that never make papers, stacked the same sentence. Brief disorientation cleared. Microwave monitors recorded tight bursts in phase with the narrowest windows. One mechanic wrote, "Do not do delicate tasks inside pulse edge" on a whiteboard, because rules beat theories when your hands shake. We tried to break the model the only honest way, by predicting behavior and watching it land. On a weak Vance circled, Type 2 corridors braided into paired lanes that advanced 9 nautical miles per pulse, then retraced, like a loom running a pattern. Above, Type 1 frames nested, one triangle inside another by a third of a baseline, holding steady through the pane, then splitting on the exact second the window closed. Beneath, Type 3 hovers stepped along station edges, stacking near spines and generator banks, drifting a few hundred meters, stacking again. If that's coincidence, timing is a comedian. The surge wrote its own rule. Power can dirty a band, only time moves the room. Agencies can call it calibration, but calibration breathes, tighten, relax, sample, repeat. This didn't relax. It held. And everyone who lives by schedules, not press releases, adjusted theirs to the beat. The heartbeat, countdown or calibration. Vance refused drama. He laid 2 reads on the same curve and let behavior pick the winner. Calibration means a system retuning to a noisy planet. Tighten tolerances, align layers, sample, relax, repeat. Countdown means tightening toward a threshold where a state flips, lock engages, geometry reconfigures, mask drops. Both fit the math. Only what follows the beat can decide. Here's what followed. In a benign retune, windows contract, hold, then breathe out. The hum did contract. It also held the gain, shaved more milliseconds, and refused to widen. Above the ice, Type 1 triangles didn't scatter after each peak. They densified and reappeared sooner on the next window. Persistence leans countdown. He tested intention with predictable bait. Time a pain, watch who shows up where. On 3 circled weeks, Type 2 corridors didn't just pace routes. They braided into paired lanes that advanced exactly 9 nautical miles per pulse, then retraced on the same cadence. Vessels under those swaths reported nothing dramatic, just quiet electronics and spotless logs. Satellites skimming those longitudes recorded tiny attitude nudges inside the pane, then flatter-than-model stability for 12 hours after. That's not chaos. That's coordination on a schedule. Ground told the same story. Type 3 hovers stacked near generator banks when the interval pinched to its narrowest, drifted a few hundred meters, and stacked again like tick marks on a checklist. Microwave. Monitors at station edges recorded short, phase-clean bursts in exact lock with the pulse edges. Techs wrote brief disorientation, cleared at the same minutes, then went back to work. If this were a sweep, the side effects would scatter. Instead, symptoms kept time. The ice put a finer point on it. Echo profiles on 2 shelves showed orthogonal ripples sharpening as intervals shrank, like a lens coming into focus. After a peak, those ripples didn't return to mush. They persisted at higher signal-to-noise. That feels like a survey net closing its solution. It also feels like a system holding a new state after lock. Vance kept a second column, intent versus effect. Intent is unknowable without a seat inside the loop. Effect gets logged. Since contraction began, deep space radio floors dipped 2 to 3 decibels during windows biased to polar sight lines. Conjunction alerts in polar bands clustered inside panes, then eased for a day. Flight corridors bent around rectangles that matched the hub clusters and held a few minutes longer each week. Whatever you name it, the behavior treats Earth like a system under management, not a mistake being corrected. Agencies leaned on Sun excuses and clutter. He circled dates and indices. The hum didn't care about solar weather. It cared about its own curve. And when a classified platform dumped power in March, the heartbeat slid and reasserted. The sky followed the clock, not the blast. If this were calibration, nobody pauses mid-stroke under jamming and resumes without hysteresis. Clocks don't negotiate. He sketched the operational checklist like he'd done it before. Step 1. Tighten the supervisor clock until phase error falls inside tolerance. Step 2. Rephase mid-altitude relays to that beat. Step 3. Anchor long baseline geometry where lock matters most. Polar longitudes, equilateral frames, steady baselines that shrink with the beat. Step 4. Ground truth at known nodes, generators, spines, shelf edges, while listening for phase closure and echo returns. Step 5. When error drops below threshold, flip state, posture, mask, or both. The tell isn't a bang, it's behavior. On a predicted pane, Type 1 frames nested, overlapped by half a baseline over a crowded polar track, then broke on the exact second the window closed. 12 hours later, projected conjunction risk softened. Calibration doesn't brighten a region deliberately and leave. Countdown does. Health notes stayed in the margin with a flag, not a siren. Brief nausea and lightheadedness at station edges during narrowest windows. A pilot compelled to arc around a box, only to hear the low throb when he slowed audio. A wall clock skip that reconciled later. Thin by design. But every one landed on the beat. Bodies recorded timing even when the paperwork didn't. He kept one hedge alive to stay honest. Calibration explains the first rib. Intervals tightened because Earth got loud. Countdown explains why they didn't relax and why formations persisted across panes. If it's calibration, you expect variability. You expect breath. If it's a countdown, you expect accumulation, more geometry, more braid, more audits, longer perimeters. It's not angels, it's schedules. The pane recurs. Triangles densify. Corridors stitch 9 miles per pulse. Audits stack at spines. Deep space bands dim on schedule and return. You can call it protection at scale, masking outbound leakage, damping collision surges, or control at the edges. Fuel burned around rectangles, tiles scrubbed, 15 minutes of unpleasant air where a maintenance zone crosses a human day. Both can be true. So where does he land? On the only place the math lets him stand. Countdown with a maintenance alibi. The clock tightens because we're loud. It locks because it has to. It holds because a state flipped. And if you're listening for fireworks, you'll miss the click that already happened. Mapping the sky. T1, T3 behavior since the pulse. Once the pulse windows carved clean edges into the night, the sky stopped behaving like a rumor and started acting like choreography. Type 1, Type 2, Type 3, what used to be categories for arguments, became layers in a build that answered the same clock with different jobs. You could time the stack and feel the system tighten. Start at altitude. Type 1 triangles used to be party tricks, rare geometry you argued about over screenshots. After the contraction, they mirrored Antarctic longitudes with a stubborn precision that turned doubt into measurement. Frames rose equilateral, held steady for the pain, and reappeared slightly forward in phase on the next window, as if the planet had shifted under a survey grid. Baselines weren't decorative, they shrank in step with interval shave, just like Vance sketched. When the heartbeat shaved 5%, triangle legs followed within seconds. Independent trackers timed formation onset against pulse edges and landed inside the same delay band every night. Nobody's light show hires a metronome like that for fun. Type 2 carried the middle story, relays with an attitude. During contraction weeks, paired bands marched above polar corridors like rails on sleepers. Speed mapped to the hum, faster on narrow windows, slower as the pane widened, though the pane barely did. 2 lanes advanced exactly 9 nautical miles per pulse. Forward on one beat, back on the next, like a loom weaving, leaving stitched signatures on long exposures. Ships pacing beneath logged nothing dramatic beyond quiet comms and honest instruments, which is what coordination looks like when it's working. Satellite pass logs over those arcs recorded tiny attitude trims inside the pane and cleaner tracks for hours after. If you want a definition for service, that's it. Nudge on the beat, calm in the wake. Type 3 kept it human. Ground hovers didn't just appear near stations anymore, they arrived with purpose. At pulse narrowest, units stacked near generator banks, trunk lines, and the edges of known spines, hung for seconds like tick marks on a checklist, drifted a few hundred meters and stacked again. Microwave monitors caught short, phase-coherent bursts coincident with their dwell. Text noted the same thing in plain words. Lights flicker at pulse edge, fine after. If you think that's spooky, you've never watched a maintenance crew audit a route with a handheld and a nod. The synchronization across layers is where the breath leaves your chest. 6 windows into March, you could sit with 3 feeds and watch a stack fall. A Type 3 appears and holds. 2 seconds later a Type 2 pair stitches overhead. 3 seconds after that a Type 1 frame locks on longitude. 7 seconds from ground audit to orbital geometry, repeating twice across the night like a refrain. Clouds didn't matter. Rhetoric didn't matter. The beat did. We aimed jammers at a band and moved nothing but our own noise. The formation answered time, not us. Look north and you'll see mirrors. Over naval staging arcs in the Pacific, Type 2 swaths formed in sympathetic cadence with polar Type 1 frames, as if the grid rehearsed choreography over friendlier lanes before pinning the routine to Antarctica. During one pane, a triangle over the limb intensified right as 2 corridors to the north merged into a single brighter path. Timestamps matched the heartbeat's middle. Vance called it cross-layer resource allocation. Everyone else called it unsettling. Patterns grew sharper as the pane approached the line Vance labeled 0. Triangles densified, legs compressed with interval shave until their baselines hit the shortest we've measured. Corridors braided tighter, 9 nautical miles per pulse, forward and back, leaving woven arcs on composites. Ground hovers lingered longer at the 3 hub clusters Vance refused to name. Then came the move you don't make by accident. During the pane's heart, 2 Type 1 frames overlapped by half their baselines, brightening a region directly over a crowded polar track. On the pane's edge, the overlap broke. Conjunction alerts eased for 12 hours. You can dismiss a night. You can't dismiss a month where geometry holds schedule. Equipment moves like it got the same memo, and tiles quietly vanish from public streams exactly when the pane lands. The sky since the pulse behaves like an instrument section playing from a score. Type 3 audits the surface where phase matters. Type 2 lays rails over the lanes that couple to space. Type 1 pins the long geometry where lock has leverage. They don't improvise anymore. They keep time. Here's the part nobody loves. Protection at scale feels like control at the edge. Flights burn extra around rectangles that match hub clusters. Pilots file, icing on clear nights because controllers need a word. Station crews step back 4 minutes before crest because they learn the hard way that delicate tasks and pulse edges don't mix. Meanwhile, deep space floors dip 2 decibels on schedule and stay quieter for a day. Trade acknowledged. Call it maintenance or countdown. The labels don't change the tape. The stack lands on the beat every time. And if you're waiting for personality, you're missing the point. A clock doesn't care what we call it. It cares that geometry answers and the pain holds. Under the ice, signals, tunnels, and geometric excavations. If the sky was finally showing its gears, the ice started showing its blueprints. Teams who don't care about lights, people who live inside waveforms and return coefficients, kept tripping the same anomaly. Ground-penetrating radar that should draw ragged, wandering crevasses began throwing back right angles. Not once, not at one site. Again and again along shelves and inland tongues, orthogonal corridors that stayed aligned after kit swaps, angle changes, and software scrubs. One crew tightened their survey grid to half-meter spacing and rotated antennas 45 degrees to smoke out artifacts. The lattice held, parallel paths equidistant, intersecting at clean nodes. Natural ice fractures meander. Melt channels curve. This grid didn't. The lead documented every step, exported raw, and mailed 2 drives before the report vanished from a repository with the friendliest note in science. Author withdrew. Thermal teams, working a separate problem, found heat where textbooks wouldn't bet a penny. Not volcanics, not plume signatures. Small, stubborn nodes perched on the edges of those radar blocks like punctuation, 1 to 2 degrees warmer than background, shifting a hair when pulse windows narrowed. Official geology waved brine fingers and instrument drift. The timing refused to wave back. The nodes slid with the heartbeat, not with tides, storms, or sun. Then the fibers started whispering. Logistics lines laid for data, and phone calls became accidental ears when crews strapped distributed acoustic sensing onto them. In quiet weeks, the fibers heard ice creep. During contraction, they caught pip trains so faint you'd miss them without a metronome, regular pips stepping along those same orthogonal paths exactly inside the pane. Filter wind, scrub footfall, clear surface chatter, the pips stayed. When the heartbeat shaved 5%, the pip spacing followed. A drone team pushed too close during a narrow window and brought home a story that makes pilots sigh. They lost telemetry on approach, not a cut, a syrup. Command latency walked half a beat behind the ground clock and stayed there. Pitch inputs answered late, rolls smeared, throttle felt like pushing a rope. No crosswind, no icing, no fog. The horizon held. The drone eased into a box no map admits, floated like it wasn't flying air, then slid out when the window closed as if someone let go. The metadata shows a clean cliff, latency back to nominal on the exact second the pane ended. You can't prove intent from a graph. But timing doesn't lie. Core cuttings added grit to theory. Metalliferous flecks that looked boring in a tray snapped into microalignment under controlled sweeps, released, then snapped again, like a lattice inside wanted to phase with something outside. Labs wrote cautious words, signal-responsive inclusion, atypical coercivity, because nobody wants to say it listens on paper. Vance only cared that they aligned just before Type 3 hovers stacked near the same site on the pane's heart. The old logs got a second life. A retired tech reprocessed dusty borehole radar with modern filters and found repeating echo motifs at fixed depths beneath holes kilometers apart. When he overlaid those motifs on the new orthogonal grids, nodes matched within error bars that make statisticians squint and nod. He called Vance, sent stacks, and said, "I think we drilled above intersections." Meanwhile, inland massed arrays that appeared during the surge started paying rent. During narrowest windows, they recorded phase-coherent RF murmurs moving inside the predicted corridors, cresting seconds before Type 3 arrived to take a station edge. Not broadcasts, low amplitude, short range, disciplined in phase, gated by the pulse. If you were running timing down engineered routes, that's exactly how it would sound. Human moments kept the map honest. A field mechanic stepped across a flagged line and felt the air go thick, the way a room feels before a speaker thumps. His handheld magnetometer twitched twice, then went polite. He checked his watch later. It skipped a second at the pain center. The camp fiber recorded a faint pip 2 seconds earlier. He wrote it down because the minute stamp matched Vance's windows. He still tells people he doesn't believe in any of this. Skeptics earn their keep. Radar can invent grids from processing sins. Heat crowds along buried brine. Fibers sing when anchors creak. Drones fail. Flecks align under stray fields. Every rebuttal stands alone. None of them answers the thread, timing. The orthogonal echoes sharpen when the pulse tightens. Thermal nodes slide with the pane. PIP trains step inside windows and along routes the radar found. Drone latency walks the beat and drops on the pane's edge. Flex align just before ground audits stack at the same corner. So we use the word that makes geologists glare and timing people grin. Excavations. Not tunnels in the shovel sense, geometric excavations to fields and stress. Structures that behave like voids to signals, like corridors to phase, presenting hard corners where nature blurs. Call them routes if tunnel tastes too much like television. Vance does. He draws rounded triangles for hubs, orthogonal subpaths feeding them, and writes one rule: they light when the clock tightens. During the pane that held perfect, the map went bright. PIP trains accelerated along 2 corridors, then paused at a node. Thermal nodes slid a degree, mast murmurs crested. A Type 3 stack ticked the nearest generator bank. A triangle nested overhead. Then the window closed. Everything relaxed by a hair, new resting rate, not idle. You can argue mechanism forever. You can't argue schedule. Under the ice, the routes carry time. Above it, geometry answers. Between them, the pane. And once you see the lattice, the sky stops being the mystery. The ground is. The polygraph and the coordinates. When Vance resurfaced with Type 0, he didn't ask for belief. He asked for measurement. The only test he trusted to separate story from self-deception wasn't about truth in court. It was congruence across a body under recall. Not the old needle box, multimodal. Pulse, respiration, microtremor, ocular fix, voice stress, skin conductance. AI looked for cross-channel conflict that liars can't hide for more than a sentence. Baseline first, name, birth month, accounted breath, a nonsense string. Then a single prompt, no interruptions. Describe the clusters, the interval schema, and what the pane does. If he was inventing, channels would slip out of step when he built scenes. If he was retrieving, they'd move like a flock. On clusters, he went smooth. No spikes at detail. He described 3 hubs drawn as rounded triangles, fed by orthogonal routes under shelves we all know but won't say. He wouldn't give coordinates, he gave behaviors. One corner leads the pulses by hundreds of microseconds. Another lags. The slope points your eye along the routes. He marked them by VLF PIP arrivals in the fibers, by thermal nodes sliding a degree at pane center, by Type 3 stacks that tick spines exactly when the heartbeat pinches narrowest. On intervals, his channels tightened like a runner finding stride. He outlined the contraction curve, clean exponential steps toward 0, hold, then another shave. He mapped it to lock cycle math you learn in other worlds. Successive approximations that close tolerance until a solution flips a state. He said Type 1 leg lengths track the beat. Triangles densify as the pane tightens. Type 2 stitches walk 9 nautical miles per pulse. Type 3 audits stack longer during the perfect pane. The machine flagged no descent between breath, pulse, and microtremor. Congruence read memory, not manufacture. Jammers? That's where the engineer sits up. Power moves spectrum, he said. Time moves systems. He described the March test. The heartbeat slips 4 milliseconds, then clicks back. You can shove a band. You don't own the metronome. Channels stayed coherent. The algorithm stamped him congruent on mechanism and outcome. Polygraphs don't prove the world, they score conviction. So we tried to break the map without telling him. We built a verification path out of things nobody controls. Step 1. Open satellite ephemerides and public pass logs. Flag platforms over predicted panes. 2 providers admitted off record to brief attitude trims inside windows. No root cause, then closed the door. Step 2. Scrape polar imagery portals. The tiles that should have been there during the pane wore the same polite band-aid. Under review. Across 2 vendors who don't coordinate. Step 3. DS raw from 2 labs with fibers in the right sectors. One sent nothing useful. The other sent slices with PIP arrivals shifted by 0.21 milliseconds between channels A and C during narrowest windows. Not a press release. Enough to get out a pencil. He gave us a bridge before he hung up, a phase offset schema between corners. Hubs shouldn't tick together. They should lead and lag by stable microseconds if lock is real. Measure delta T across routes during the pane, he said. If the slope reverses, you drew the triangle wrong. We pushed that ask to 3 labs. 2 declined. 1 sent anonymized time codes and nothing else. The offsets landed where his napkin said they would. We didn't print anything that sounded like coordinates. We wrote a rule set instead. Do not publish numbers you can't defend. Start with timing, not shapes. Demand reproducibility across domains, fiber pips, RF murmurs, echo ripples, sky choreography inside the pane. Treat Polygraph. Output as a barometer of belief, not proof. Let the clock be the only judge that doesn't lie. While that was happening, a separate contractor fed us a quiet tell. Pain awareness in places that won't admit the word. Dispatchers padded reserve on polar legs by a percent that never hits memos. Station managers slid maintenance advisories over the narrow windows. Portable masts migrated a kilometer the night before the pain held. Nobody said Type 0. Everyone behaved like they read the same schedule. We pinned 3 rounded triangles to a blank wall and never wrote names. We annotated edges with what the pain does. At corner 1, PIP arrivals lead by a hair. Type 3 stacks first. Thermal nodes slide earliest. At corner 2, arrivals center the pain. The audit lingers longest. At corner 3, arrivals lag. Sky geometry breaks last. We taped a rule above the map. Trust process, not secrets. People can lie. Clocks don't. And because the clock doesn't answer to adjectives, we set the next test. Pick a pain 2 weeks out. Predict where the offsets should tighten, where stitches should step 9 miles per pulse, where triangles should nest by a third of a baseline, and where audits should tick spines. Publish nothing but the schedule. Let time grade the homework. We didn't get fireworks. We got what we asked for. Pips arrived early on the corner we marked. Masts recorded murmurs cresting seconds before Type 3 stacked. A triangle overlapped another, half a baseline, over a crowded polar track during the pain's center, then broke on the window's edge. The offsets tightened into the noise. That's not belief. That's a metronome doing its job. Polygraph gave us confidence he wasn't inventing a story. The coordinates, without numbers, came from clocks behaving like clocks. If you need something to trust in a room full of euphemism, trust the pain. Dark forest, why a defense grid activates. From Vance's view, Type 0 didn't wake up for drama. It woke because we got loud. Over 5 years, we thickened orbit with routers and cameras, laser links and phased arrays, an accidental beacon. Engineers call it throughput. In a universe that punishes disclosure, it reads as a flare. That's where the dark forest logic fits, not as fiction, as operating policy. In a forest where every hunter fears discovery, the only safe posture is silence. Translate that to a planet that suddenly radiates in every band, and a custodial grid has 2 jobs: manage signature and keep the traffic from hitting itself. Not by turning us off, but by shaping when and how we leak. Watch the beat. During heavy launch weeks, the pain tightened and Type 1 frames parked over polar bands where traffic densifies. Deep space floors dipped a couple of decibels inside the window. Catalogs called it calibration. The heartbeat called it mask. Vance didn't guess motive, he logged effect. Quiet bands, nested geometry, stitched lanes, audits on time. You can call that coincidence once. Not 10 pains in a row. He pushed the collision story because the math demands it. In 2025, near-miss alerts spiked in polar corridors. The hum shortened. Type 2 pairs wove rails, 9 nautical miles per pulse, over routes that couple to space. Minutes later, 2 platforms reported tiny attitude trims, then flatter than model stability for a half day. That looks like damping. Nudge the swarm on the beat, then let the system breathe. Agencies offered sun and clutter. He overlaid indices. The sun didn't match the pain. The pain matched itself. When a radiator dumped power in March, the clock slipped and clicked back. Geometry answered time, not noise. In a dark forest frame, that's exactly what you build. Control in the time domain, where adversaries can't easily interfere without owning the clock. Protection at planetary scale doesn't feel gentle up close. Maintenance zones rattle guts for 15 minutes and make instruments twitch. Flights bend around rectangles with no NOTAM. Tiles go under review. That isn't malice. It's price. A mask that damps outbound leakage and a posture that deflects clutter can't be invisible everywhere. Upstream mercy becomes downstream inconvenience. Vance avoided romance. He listed 3 plausible outcomes the pain enables. Camouflage. Scheduled quieting in deep space bands that lowers our broadcast footprint while leaving terrestrial service mostly intact. Geometry. Long baseline anchors that reconfigure the net for better phase and collision management. Defense. Synchronized layers that absorb surges when conjunction risk goes ugly. All 3 share a prerequisite: lock across layers. That's what Type 0 buys by tightening the beat until phase error fits inside tolerance. Then there's the part nobody loves to say out loud. If quiet is survival, a grid that assumes the worst about neighbors will prioritize concealment over convenience every time. That means bending trains in the sky and erasing rectangles on maps without apology. From their perspective, it's restraint. From ours, it's control. The pain keeps both truths on the table. You can see the same ethic in paperwork if you stop reading euphemisms like poetry. Space Force AI doctrine bakes anomaly detection into orbital watch, prioritizes passive ears, layers redundancy under the pain. Procurement lines fatten around resilience in polar operations. Commercial feeds fold into quiet stacks. Publicly, routine safety. Operationally, build around a schedule you don't admit exists. The ethics aren't tidy. The pain that kept two platforms from breathing on each other also made a mechanic steady his hand and a captain burn reserve. But the day after, deep space floors were calmer, and the 12-hour plots looked like someone had smoothed a wrinkle. In a forest that punishes loud things, timing is the only kindness you get. So why now? Because the curves crossed. Launch cadence, constellation density, crosslink lasers, SER duty cycles, all rose past a custodial threshold a sleeping lattice could tolerate. The hum tightened because it had to. The sky answered because it listens. The perimeter widened because denial doesn't move geometry. And jammers retired in silence because power can't shame a clock. There's a darker edge Vance won't deny. Friend or foe triage at species scale. If the grid assigns priority to sovereign quiet, it will choose the planet over our plans. It will schedule our sky and call it safety. It will make maintenance zones feel like pressure, so distant ears don't mark our coordinates in a ledger we don't get to read. None of that demands aliens. It demands architecture that cares about outcomes more than explanations. A lattice that lowers signature during windows. A score the sky plays on schedule. A pain that arrives, holds, and changes behavior. We keep asking for intention. The beat gives us function. And function is enough to explain why a quiet, old system would come fully awake in 2026. We raised a flare. The forest is dark. The metronome did its job. Protection versus control, the human cost. From 30,000 feet, it reads like stewardship. Timing tightens, geometry holds, deep space bands dim on schedule. Down where lives brush the pain, it feels like something else. Protection at planetary scale translates into pressure where people stand, and the clock doesn't ask. Start at the edges where the audits bite. 3 stations spread across the shelf logged the same small entry during narrow windows. Brief disorientation cleared. No alarms. No medical evac. For the 7 minutes where balance felt untrustworthy, a metallic taste rose, and hands hovered over racks until the air got honest again. You can argue cold, altitude, and fatigue. You can't argue timing. Their minute stamps landed exactly inside the pain. Equipment speaks without metaphors. Hardened systems that shrug off storms tripped into backup loops at pulse edges. Short flips, then clean returns. 2 generator banks sagged for seconds without load spikes. Microwave monitors recorded tight surges in the same moments. The entries never made a press release, they changed shift planning. A handwritten rule went up on a station whiteboard. No delicate tasks inside narrowest window. That's not superstition. That's behavior learning a schedule. Flights learned their etiquette faster than the paperwork did. Polar legs that live on straight lines started bending around rectangles no NOTAM admits. One captain burned deeper into reserve than he likes, landed tight, and filed numbers with a temper he saved for better days. At home, he slowed the cockpit audio and heard the low throb rise right before he nudged the turn. A sound too low for a human ear mid-flight, obvious when playback trades altitude for bandwidth. Dispatchers padded fuel by a quiet percent on pain weeks. Controllers cleared, icing advisories on clear nights. Everybody used language that wouldn't get them called into an office. Families far from ice recorded their own crumbs without knowing the map. A baby monitor hummed a regular beat for 90 seconds on a night her father steadied himself against a rack at pain center. It isn't science. It is human. The timing landed where the heartbeat did. The pain keeps its appointments whether anyone names it in a hallway. Perimeters make the ethic real. Lines that were temporary safety cones turned into quiet norms. Portable masts moved a kilometer the night before the pain held. Access polygons remapped. Badges that opened doors yesterday flashed red today. Laminate signs said soil instability, because you have to print something. Field crews who have walked ice for a decade could smell schedule. They step back because they like their jobs and want to keep their hands steady. Space Force calls this resilience. The spreadsheet calls it budget lines. Redundancy under a beat. Dual-path comms rehearsed on pain weeks. Crosslink handoffs drilled when the heartbeat pinches narrowest. The exercises never say why the dates matter. The after-action notes do, in the language of risk officers who finally slept. Window execution nominal. Ethics arrives as invoices. A pane lowers outbound leakage by a couple decibels into deep space and smooths a day's conjunction model. The bill lands on the ground within those minutes, flickers, backup loops, a mechanic's breath held for 5 beats, a pilot's arc and extra fuel, a tile labeled, under review, right where a public I wanted routine. None of it is catastrophic. All of it is real. Aggregate benefit. Local cost. Agencies choose words that keep rooms calm. Calibration. Routine safety. Icing. Maintenance. They're not lying, they're translating. But translation doesn't blunt the part that matters. The clock wins. Jammers retire quietly. Perimeters breathe with the schedule. Crews plan work away from narrow windows. Pilots trust a feeling they can't justify on radio. The pain becomes calendar, not rumor. You could call it coercion. The grid won't argue because it doesn't talk. It sets timing and moves systems. A caretaker that assumes the universe punishes disclosure will bend routes and blank tiles without asking. It will wait sovereign quiet over convenience. It will run audits that make a stomach flip so a deep space floor looks calmer an hour later. Mercy in the bands, pressure in the aisles. So you write rules no memo will print. If you're near a generator, do the fine motor task 4 minutes before crest or after it passes. If you're planning a polar leg, treat rectangles crews already curved around as terrain. If your instrument skips at pain center and reconciles later, log the minute. You don't need adjectives. You need time. You also ask for the only studies that matter. Transparent health work near maintenance zones that respects privacy and publishes aggregates. Tag symptoms to windows and routes, not to myths. See if the curve the clock draws shows up in bodies. If it does, mitigate. If it doesn't, stop scaring people who still have to hold a wrench. Protection and control aren't opposites here. They're a scale. On one end, fewer close calls and quieter bands. On the other, humans moved by a schedule they didn't set. Both live inside the same pain. On good days, the trade feels fair. On bad days, it feels like being managed. Either way, the beat arrives, holds, does its work, and leaves. Our choice is whether to pretend it didn't or to plan like adults who live under a clock. Space Force perimeter, quiet mission, loud paper trail. While the pain tightened, the ground game shifted from deniable curiosity to managed perimeter. You saw it 2 places at once, where tracks cut snow and where budgets met Congress. On the ice, posture arrived in pieces. Unmarked convoys rolled at night, flatbeds, enclosed vans, fuel bozers shadowed by low-slung trucks with antenna farms that folded like origami. They staged inland, not on visible pads, and raised portable arrays that looked like cell towers until you clocked the grounding. Braided straps star-washed into snow, driven deep the way you do when phase matters more than bars. Access polygons remapped in an afternoon. A path folks had walked 10 winters sat behind a soft cordon enforced by a smile and a laminated card that said soil instability, where timing zone belonged. The air picture bent to match the ground without ever admitting it. No-fly shells didn't hit public maps. They arrived as icing advisories and weather adjustments that curved corridors around rectangles with corners suspiciously close to Vance's hubs. Dispatchers padded reserve by a quiet percent on pain weeks. Pilots learned the etiquette fast. Bend when the throb rises, argue less, land safe. The detours went into logs as deviations, not doctrine, but fuel sheets kept telling the truth. Across an ocean of carpet and cubicles, the paper trail wrote the same posture in language that avoids clocks. The Space Force FI 2025 data and AI strategic action plan formalized what field teams already knew. Anomaly detection wasn't a pet project, it was doctrine. Lines of effort were tidy: governance, digital fluency, accelerated machine learning, deep partnerships. But the footnotes made it plain these weren't slides. Satellite pass ingestion, cross-domain fusion, edge analytics, baselined. Budgets fattened under, resilience in polar operations. Procurement blurred sensors and software into contracts that buy timing more than metal. Partnerships widened like a net. Commercial imagery and comms flowed into classified stacks with redundancy by design. Public-facing vendors smiled about trusted defense collaboration. In the back end, their polar coverage fed the same timing-aware engines that watched the pane. When an imaging platform flagged a frame inside a window, that flag didn't die in a ticket queue. It piped straight to the watch floor that lives by the beat. Contradiction leaked where it always does, between a microphone and a spreadsheet. A spokesperson praised routine safety and no change to flight operations, while the next day's contract modification expanded airspace coordination around the very rectangles crews were already curving. Officially, there were no perimeters. Practically, certain screens were translucent shells that bled and shifted like tide lines, ebbed between pulses, tighten on predicted zero. Absorption wasn't only about air and ice. It was about sight. Small independent feeds that used to catch triangles and ground hovers found their best clips DMCA'd by parties with no visible skin. Uploaders got cordial emails about platform policy. A few got new day jobs at companies that signed non-disclosures. The public story stayed tidy. The back-channel story reduced noise at the cost of trust. Redundancy moved from slide to muscle. If the heartbeat can push you off balance, you don't fight the clock, you layer under it. Dual-path comms, multi-constellation NAV fallback, cross-link handoffs rehearsed on the same weeks the pane pinched narrowest. The exercises never said why the calendar mattered. The after-action notes did, in the relieved tone of risk officers. Window execution nominal. You could ignore a convoy. You couldn't ignore the synchronization. Arrays hummed before a pane and went quiet after. Perimeters thickened like a membrane, flexible, timed, responsive, bowing when traffic pressed, snapping back on the beat. Controllers cleared gentle reroutes on cloudless nights with voices that stopped apologizing. Station managers circulated maintenance advisories that looked a lot like preemptive evacuations from edges where audits bite. Contractors saw access polygons redrawn by schedule, not argument. The pane didn't care what you called it. It cared that everyone behaved as if they'd read the same clock. The loudest tells lived in the boring lines. Procurement language began to rhyme with Vance's napkin without saying his words. Distributed ground nodes, timing discipline, edge analytics for windowed anomalies. Multi-year funding turned pilot into program of record. The AI line stopped being a buzzword and became a tool. Classifiers trained on pane minutes, detectors tuned to phase hints, fuses built to weigh time over amplitude. You could trace the money from Capitol Hill to a mast sunk into snow and feel the same ethic. Build around schedule, don't pretend time doesn't run the room. Across town, one more quiet shift. Insurers and regulators adopted pane vocabulary without ever printing it. Risk models for polar legs added a variable that makes underwriters twitch, temporal exposure. Maintenance permits near hubs acquired a line for window avoidance. Nobody said type 0. Everyone behaved like the pane had moved from rumor to calendar entry. This is how perimeter looks when you're managing a clock you don't own. No grand declarations. Membranes instead of walls. Masts that migrate a kilometer without press. Flights that arc around rectangles with polite names. Paper that stays loud while missions stay quiet. Between them, a heartbeat that arrives, holds, and makes the room move, whether anyone admits it or not. The incident report, drone absorbed during surge. They launched on a pane day because that's how you learn. Small fixed wing, stabilized payload, running a clean box along a flagged sector at the edge of a hub route. Weather perfect, wind honest, the kind of blue that makes lies look stupid. The pilot had flown this pattern a dozen times. He picked the narrow window on purpose. If type 0 owned the beat, you'd see it under pressure. Two legs were textbook. Airspeed steady, pitch and roll inside spec, link latency flat. Then the pane tightened, right on the minute Vance circled, and the numbers stopped behaving without misbehaving. Not a spike, a slope. Heading drifted a degree, then two, with no crosswind to blame. Roll inputs came back heavy. Pitch lagged like the plane was thinking it over. Telemetry didn't drop. It thickened. The video feed stayed boring. White, shadow, sastrugi, all the ordinary lines. No fog, no shimmer, no cinematic anything. But the drone's body language changed. Throttle felt like pushing into syrup. Commands hauled through molasses. The operator tapped return to home to prove he wasn't imagining it. The bird didn't turn. It quivered, nose twitched, and eased forward like it had slid into a medium that wasn't air. On the ground, They called it absorption because engineers reach for the least dramatic word that fits. The link was healthy, RSSI strong. Packet timing walked half a beat behind the ground clock and stayed there. IMU showed tiny, regular corrections at 4-second intervals, subtle, steady, like an external rhythm tapping a metronome through the fuselage. The map told the story the horizon didn't. The drone had crossed an invisible edge into a box nobody had drawn and surrendered control authority to viscosity you can't measure with wind socks. 15 seconds into the syrup, the payload recorded a uniform dimming. No cloud shadow, no lens flare, just loss of contrast that swallowed texture and handed it back gray. It lasted 8 seconds, sat exactly inside the pane's center, and lifted like a curtain. The operator swore, checked battery, tapped mode changes that answered late and wrong, and felt every part of his training that says don't fight physics, try to pull his hands off the sticks. Then the pain ended. It looked like a cliff in the logs. Latency snapped to nominal. Pitch took commands. Roll obeyed. The drone slid sideways as if let go by a hand you couldn't see, dipped a wing, auto-level caught it, and the pilot nursed it home with a grip that left fingerprints in foam. No damage. No drama. A story nobody wants to explain out loud. The metadata is why it isn't just camp lore. Timestamps align to the beat to the second. Packet timing shows a staircase into lag and a clean dropout on the window's edge. IMU reveals those 4-second micro-corrections during the drift, taps that match the pane's internal cadence we've logged across systems. The payload's dim lands dead center in the pane. Amassed a kilometer inland recorded a low RF murmur cresting as the drone crossed the invisible line. The incident report that leaked, headers, incident codes, the bloodless tone of people who expect audits, didn't use the word absorption. It called it a platform null return within pulse burst, tracked phase lag, reflection continuity lost, power harmonic spike, and listed responses, perimeter expansion, asset redeployment, data sharing narrowed to need to know. The phrase window-constrained anomaly did more work than it looked like. Caveats live here because integrity does. Vendor time bases drift. Shutters stutter. Masks lie when software hiccups. Anomalies love to wear bugs as costumes. But even inside caution, the pattern stares. The lag matches the pain. The loss of contrast sits on the pulse. The recovery lands on the minute the window closes. The RF murmur crests seconds before the syrup. Timing doesn't explain mechanism. It does explain schedule. What makes it more than a one-off scare is how it echoes the rest of the map. The drone's syrup matches the pilot, who felt the air go thick near a flagged line. The packet half-beat matches distributed acoustic pips stepping along orthogonal routes. The payload dim belongs beside scrub tiles nobody will own. The way the drone slid out on pane edge mirrors triangles that overlap and break exactly on time. The crew kept flying after. Pane days earn new rules. Don't put your bird in the teeth of a clock. Plan patterns to cross edges outside narrowest windows. Treat invisible boxes like terrain. They didn't need a memo. Muscle memory learns faster than policy. The perimeter learned too. Soft cordons grew a kilometer overnight. Masts migrated with the schedule. Access shifted from ask us to don't ask. Incident codes acquired a new line item with a number you cannot FOIA. Window execution nominal appeared in a place it hadn't before. Believe or don't, the pane doesn't care. It arrives, holds, and makes systems answer time. This was a small platform with a cheap payload and a pilot with good habits. It still told the same story Vance drew on a napkin. Cross into a bright route during a narrow window, and the medium changes. The air thickens. Control turns to syrup. Then the beat releases and permission returns like gravity. Fields don't sign for damages. Clocks don't apologize. You adjust. Mini-chapter cliffhanger, the zero window. Vance called it the held breath before the switch. His curve said the intervals wouldn't tighten forever. They'd converge to a pane so clean you could shave on it, then hold. No wobble, no drift, long enough for the system to do what countdowns are for. He drew it as a thin white band on the board and wrote one word above it, 0. Prep telegraphed it days out. Dispatch quietly padded reserve on polar legs. Station managers posted maintenance advisories that looked suspiciously like preemptive stepbacks from edges where audits bite. Portable masts slid a kilometer at dusk and hummed lighter loads. The pane calendar nobody prints circulated as subtle habits. Don't start the delicate task in the next hour. Route around rectangles crews already curved. Stand back for minutes before crest. Then the clock leaned into the line. The last contraction shaved, paused, and, this is the tell, didn't relax. It sat on the pane like glass. In the seismo-acoustic we weren't supposed to have, the interval edges went razor straight. Deep space floors dipped 2, sometimes 3 decibels, biased to polar sight lines, on the exact minutes the pane predicted. 2 platforms recorded micro-trims, no fault codes, then skated 12 hours flatter than pre-launch models. No speeches. The pane does not deliver speeches. Above the limb, Type 1 frames didn't just appear, they anchored. One triangle nested inside another by a third of a baseline and held steady through the window with no visible jitter. Seconds before pane center, a second frame slid into overlap, brightening a region directly over a crowded polar track. At the pane's edge, the overlap broke like a snapped chalk line. Conjunction alerts eased for the next day. If you want fireworks, look somewhere else. This was a click you feel in the shoulders of a system. Type 2 lanes did their part like muscle under skin. Over staging arcs, corridors stitched 9 nautical miles per pulse, forward on one beat, back on the next, repeating until the pane closed. Long exposures looked woven. Vessels beneath filed nothing but quiet logs. Satellites over those rails reported attitude nudge and settle in the window, then clean passes. From inside the room where timing pays the bills, that's what mercy looks like. Ground audits arrived on cue. Type 3 hovers stacked near generator banks, trunk lines, and spines at each cluster, held longer than usual, drifted a few hundred meters, then stacked again like tick marks on a list. Microwave monitors at edges recorded short, phase-clean bursts at pulse rise and fall. 2 wall clocks skipped a second in perfect sync and reconciled later. 3 techs logged brief disorientation, cleared because the form has no field for pain. Bodies are sensors whether anyone funds them. Across an ocean, a baby monitor hummed a low, regular beat for 90 seconds. It isn't lab grade, it isn't controlled, it isn't anything but human, and its timestamp sat squarely inside the pane. Vance didn't claim meaning, he circled time. The pane connects what paperwork refuses to. Tiles told on themselves. Public repositories flagged temporal anomalies, inside the window across vendors who never coordinate. Another swapped frames for under review. Nobody's obliged to confirm your hunches. Clocks confirm them without asking. Then came the move that ended arguments in quiet rooms. At minute 3 of the held pane, 2 Type 1 frames overlapped by half a baseline, right over a gravelly swath of tracked objects. 12 minutes later, overlap broke on the pane's edge. The next 12 hours looked easier on the modelers than the 12 before. You can call that coincidence if you like your math with blinders. Air moved like a membrane. Controllers cleared, icing advisories on a night that sparkled. Pilots didn't argue. Perimeters thickened around rectangles no press office will own. Portable. Arrays stepped another 1,000 meters without complaint. A drone team scratched a hop and wrote wind in dead calm because etiquette learns faster than policy. The pane held. It didn't widen or shrink. It sat there like a door, latch open, hand on the knob, while geometry knitted and bands dimmed. When it released, triangles relaxed a finger's width. Corridors loosened a stitch. Audits thinned from stacks to spot checks. The heartbeat settled to a new resting rate, not idle, not frantic. If you weren't measuring, you'd say nothing happened. If you were, you watched a system leave one state and enter another without raising its voice. Here's the part that gnaws. 6 hours later, intervals began tightening again, barely measurably. The pane wasn't a finale. It was a mode shift and a promise. The next white band already sits on the calendar people pretend not to read. Vance tapped the line he'd drawn weeks earlier and spoke like he was ordering coffee. Lock engaged. The room didn't cheer. Schedules changed. A colonel briefed routine measures with a face that looked 3 hours short on sleep. A mechanic moved a delicate task out of the narrow window without explaining why to anyone who hasn't felt the throb. A controller stopped apologizing for clear night reroutes. Somewhere a family set 2 cereal bowls and never knew the pane had passed. The pane isn't a story beat. It's a schedule. It arrives, holds, does work, and leaves. If you wait for permission to care, the clock won't notice. It never does. Back to the beginning, the first flicker we ignored. 3 years earlier, it was just clutter. Odd echoes tagged ionospheric junk and archived. In the 200s, clutter thickened. By 2015, faint coordination surfaced. In 2025, AI flagged timing. We didn't see a message. We missed a metronome. What we can say, what we can't. Here's where we stop naming ghosts and stack what holds. First column, behaviors you can time with a cheap clock and a stubborn heart. The heartbeat step from hum to heartbeat on a curve you can lay a ruler on. Contraction, pain, new resting rate. Type 1 to 3 stopped being rumors and started behaving like layers. Triangles densifying on cue. Corridors stitching 9 nautical miles per pulse. Ground audits stacking at spines exactly when the interval pinched. Deep space floors dipped 2 to 3 decibels during windows biased to polar sight lines. Conjunction alerts clustered inside those panes and eased after. Flights bent around rectangles nobody names. None of that requires belief. It requires a calendar. Second, Space Force posture moved from slides to muscle. Portable arrays appeared inland as procurement lines fattened under resilience in polar operations. AI doctrine for anomaly detection got baselined. Edge analytics tuned to Windows showed up in job descriptions. Commercial feeds folded into the same watch floor that watches the pane. Perimeters behaved like membranes, flexible, timed, responsive, tightening on predicted 0 and relaxing after. Nobody said type 0. Everybody behaved like they'd read the same schedule. Third, timing beat explanations that tried to talk the pain away. Solar indices didn't line up with the tightest windows. Clutter doesn't densify triangles, stitch lanes in 9-mile steps, and make masts record phase coherent murmurs seconds before type 3 stacks. A radiator dumped power. The heartbeat slipped for milliseconds and clicked back. Geometry answered time, not blast. That doesn't prove intent. It proves domain. Whoever owns time owns the room. Strongly indicated, and we keep the hedge. A ground source supervisor clock, call it type 0, driving phase across ground, sky, and bands. The orthogonal echoes and radar returns that sharpened with interval shave. The thermal nodes that slid by a degree on pane center. DS pips stepping along routes inside windows. Mast murmurs cresting seconds before ground audits. Triangles and corridors keeping the same beat above. All of it points to a lattice that carries time, not just a broadcast we happen to tune. Cold War, ice cube, fragments with non-thermal interference curve like bruises in the same place. If you're allergic to the word grid, call it architecture. It doesn't care what we name it. Now the unresolved column, and we say it out loud. Drone absorption? Alleged until independent labs sign the metadata. The narrative matches timing. Bugs love to dress as anomalies. Geometric excavations under ice? We don't have doors, we have signals that behave like routes. Orthogonal echo motifs, pip trains, thermal punctuation, and RF murmurs that move on schedule. Metalliferous flecks that snap into microalignment. Interesting, not definitive. They need peer review, not headlines. Human health effects, suggestive, not settled. Brief dizziness at station edges, metallic tastes, clocks skipping and reconciling, cockpit arcs that line up with pain minutes. Each thin alone, together patterned enough to demand transparent. Studies near maintenance zones. Tag symptoms to windows, not to myths. Publish aggregates, protect privacy, stop scaring crews who still have to hold a wrench. Intent is the part we do not own. Mask, defense, control, labels we slap on effects. The dark forest lens explains why deep space floors dim during panes and why nested triangles brighten crowded tracks for minutes and break at the window's edge. It doesn't confer motive. Vance's line holds. Intent unknowable without a seat inside the loop, effect logged. Since contraction began, the effect reads like management. Lower outbound leakage on schedule, nudge swarms when conjunction risk spikes, verify phase at nodes that matter, schedule our sky without asking. Integrity rules stay taped to the wall. Separate speculation from verifiable patterns. Demand cross-domain replication. DS pips, RF murmurs, echo ripples, sky choreography inside the pane. Trust process, not secrets. People can lie. Clocks don't. Publish timecodes before adjectives. If you can't defend a coordinate, don't print it. Scrub tiles are not conspiracies without chain of custody. The pane is the only judge that never needs a press office. So what can we say without flinching? A clock in the ground appears to be calling beats the sky answers. The heartbeat tightened to a 0 window during which geometry held. Bands dimmed slightly, corridors stitched in measured steps, ground audits stacked longer, and an overlap over a crowded polar track broke on the pane's edge while models breathed easier for a day. After, the system settled to a new resting rate and began tightening again. The perimeter, the convoys, the masts, the membranes, the fuel sheets, moved as if anticipating that schedule and building muscle around it. None of that requires extraterrestrial anything. It requires an old architecture that got loud enough feedback to tighten. What we can't say is whose hand wrote the score. We can list the outcomes: sovereign quiet that trades aggregate safety for local inconvenience, choreography that looks like protection at scale and control at the edges, audits that make a mechanic steady his coffee while 1,000 metal fragments in a shell don't kiss. We can't claim ownership of the routes. Hubs may breathe. Baselines might reconfigure now that lock's engaged. Zero looked less like a finish line and more like a door. Where does that leave us? Unspectacular and urgent. Build citizen verification around time. Pair fibers, masts, seismo-acoustic ears with clean clocks. Publish raw panes with chain of custody notes that would pass a court. Push for pain-aware safety without turning side effects into monsters. Demand transparent health studies. Call perimeters what they are even if the map won't. Stop asking the grid to explain itself. It won't. Meet it with measurement, not myth. Act 2 closes with 2 neat columns. In one, a schedule that moves systems on cue, geometry that keeps time, bands that dim when the pain holds, and a perimeter that learned the calendar. In the other, incidents that still need signatures, data that still needs replication, and the humility to keep hedges honest. Between them sits the reason you're still here, the reveal we've held back until the clock forced it. In Act 3, we stop watching the pain and watch what the lock did. The orbital signatures, the mask and the bands, and the billet hands to the ground. The disclosure, the lock and the mask. When the pain held and didn't flinch, the story stopped being about hints. Lock isn't a headline, it's a signature. You see it first where physics keeps score, attitude plots, band floors, and geometry that refuses to jitter when it should. Start with orbits. 2 classes of platforms on polar pass. Different vendors, different altitudes, logged microtrims during the held pain, followed by 12 hours of flatter-than-model stability. No fault codes. No why. Then silence. That's not a fluke. That's an environment easing just enough on time to clean the line and let the models breathe. You won't get a press release for that. You will get an after-action note that says nominal in a tone that sounds like relief. Now the bands. Deep space floors that normally live with our accidental noise. Crosslinks, radars, side lobes, dipped 2, sometimes 3 decibels during the window, biased hard to polar sight lines. The dent wasn't a blackout, it was a mask. It rolled in right on pain's start, held on the blade, and lifted on the second the window closed. 2 public repositories called it transient anomalies, then withdrew the preprints. The raw still shows the edges sharp enough to time with a cheap watch. Over the limb, the triangles stopped flirting and did work. One type, one frame nested inside another by 1/3 of a baseline and held steady through the pain like anchors. Mid-window, a second frame slid into overlap by half a leg over a crowded polar track, exactly where conjunction models had been sweating. On pain edge, the overlap broke like a snapped chalk line. The next 12 hours looked cleaner. If you want fireworks, you picked the wrong story. If you want function, this is it. Type 2 answered in the middle like muscle. Corridors stitched 9 nautical miles per pulse, forward on one beat, back on the next, no drift, no wobble. Long exposures looked woven. Pilots under the high arcs filed clear night, icing, and flew arcs they couldn't justify on radio. Upstairs, the lanes rewove the same strip until the pain closed. After, passes ran calmer. Nobody needed a lecture. The pain had already written the lesson. Ground truth matched the score. Type 3 hovers stacked at generator banks, trunk lines, and spines in each cluster, lingered longer than usual, drifted a few hundred meters, then stacked again like a checklist. Microwave monitors caught short, clean bursts on pulse rise and fall. 2 wall clocks skipped a beat and reconciled. 3 techs wrote brief disorientation, cleared, because there's no field for pain on a maintenance form. Bodies are sensors. They keep time even when policy can't say the word. Put the pieces together, and you get a picture that stops caring about adjectives. Lock is coordination across layers, so tight the jitter disappears. It shows up as nested geometry that doesn't shake, as trims that settle a half day of attitude, as stitched rails that reweave a strip on the beat, as audits that confirm phase at the nodes that matter. You don't need intention to say what happened. You need a clock and the humility to accept an outcome. Mask is where posture becomes policy. The quieting in deep space bands isn't philosophy. It's a hand on a mixer that lowers outbound leakage through narrow windows that count, damping the frequencies that travel far while leaving our daily lives mostly intact. Users didn't lose signal bars. Telescopes did. Public feeds called it under review. The pane called it schedule. There's a bill. Every mask writes one. It lands as coverage anomalies in public streams exactly on the pane. As clear night reroutes around rectangles nobody will name. As a mechanic's hand hovering over a rack for 7 minutes. As a drone that felt the air turn thick and slid out on pane edge. As a family's monitor that hummed for 90 seconds at window center. None of it is apocalypse. All of it is consequence. Agencies tried to sell calibration because calibration is comfortable. But calibration doesn't nest triangles, doesn't dent deep space floors on a schedule, doesn't stitch lanes in 9-mile steps and break the pattern on the pane's edge, doesn't produce synchronized microtrims across 2 vendors and gift you flatter lines for hours after. Calibration cleans its own instrument. Lock coordinates many. Meaning sits here, quiet and heavy. A custodial system, call it a defense grid if you need a name. Engaged lock to coordinate sky nodes, and engaged a mask to lower how loudly we shout into the dark on a schedule we don't set. Not shutdown, not theater, camouflage in windows, geometry on cue, audits that make phase honest. Protection at one scale, pressure at another. The pane makes both true. You can feel the posture in how rooms behave. Controllers stopped apologizing for clear night reroutes. Perimeters breathed with the schedule like membranes, flexible, timed, responsive. Portable arrays migrated a kilometer on pane eve. Dispatchers padded reserve by a quiet %. Nobody said type 0. Everyone acted like the pane had moved from rumor to calendar. After the held pane, nothing grand fell apart. Triangles relaxed a finger's width. Corridors loosened a stitch. Audits thinned. The heartbeat settled to a new resting rate and began tightening again. Lock wasn't a finale. It was a state change, the system saying ready, without raising its voice. The next white band already sits on calendars people pretend not to read. If you want proof, stop asking for speeches. Watch the room when the pane holds. Bands dim. Geometry anchors. Trims land. Rails stitch. Audits stack. People step back 4 minutes before crest without instructions. That's disclosure in the only language that matters here, behavior on time. The lock and the mask aren't announcements. They're what happens when a metronome counts down to 0 and the world answers. The smoking gun we can show. You don't have to trust a whisper, a leak, or a face you've never met. You can trust a waveform, a timestamp, and a clock. So here's the piece we can put on the table without asking anyone's permission. The pane hour, the heartbeat, and the sky answering on time. We start simple. 2 files, publicly obtainable, chain of custody intact. File 1, the polar seismo-acoustic capture from the held pane. File 2, a sphere network pulse train recorded by independent trackers within that same week, cross-validated by 3 groups who don't share donors, politics, or patience. When you lay them over each other, you don't get vibes, you get phase congruence. Peaks crest within tens of milliseconds on the pane. The contraction lines match. The hold sits flat like glass. When the pane releases, both widen in the same second. No adjectives necessary. The pane does not negotiate. Now add pictures to rhythm. We built 3 correlation maps that pair the heartbeat's interval edges with what the sky and ground did on either side of the ice. For type 1, we measured baseline lengths frame by frame and plotted them against interval shave. Shorten the beat by X%. The legs contract by Y within a fixed delay band that never wanders more than a second either way. For type 2, we measured stitch distance, 9 nautical miles per pulse, forward on odd pulses, back on even, with stitch points landing in the window across nights. For type 3, we timed hover stack durations at cluster edges and marked their 200 and 300 meter drifts. Stack times lengthen on the pane, drifts step at the pulse, then both relax when the window releases. 3 layers, 1 metronome. You don't need our screenshots. We'll publish the recipe. Anchor to the pane hour via the Polar Archive. Fetch independent type 1 to 3 observation timestamps from groups we vetted for custody. Pull open ephemerides to know who was overhead. Align by the pane edges. If you don't see the lock on the pane, stop watching this channel. If you do, you'll feel what we felt the first time the curves clicked. This isn't choreography for cameras. It's a survey running on time. Next exhibit, quieting where it matters most. Deep space receivers that publish minute resolution floors show dents. 2, sometimes 3 decibels, aligned to the pane and biased to polar view. Not blackouts, not excuses. Dents with edges sharp enough to cut paper, rolling in at pane start and lifting at pane end. Two observatories posted preprints about transient radio quieting in deep space bands. Both withdrew. The raw stayed up. We'll link it. Pain minute highlighted, no arrows, no music. Now for the part critics love to call rumor until time stamps shut them up, coverage gaps. We're not pointing at missing tiles and yelling conspiracy. We're giving you a grid, providers, timestamps, and pain minutes. Two repositories flagged temporal anomalies inside the window across the same longitude band. A third swapped frames for under review. Could be coincidence. Coincidence rarely books the same minutes across vendors who don't coordinate. On the same night, triangles nested and overlap broke like a snapped line exactly on pain edge. You want something closer to the metal. We asked two labs with fibers laid near Vance's rounded triangle clusters to run the dumbest possible test. Mark pip arrival deltas at pulse edges between channels. One gave us a shrug. The other sent anonymized slices with a consistent 0.21 millisecond offset between channels A and C during the narrowest windows. Not a press tour. Raw files, pain minutes circled. The delta T lands exactly where a ground clock schema says it should if one corner leads and another lags by stable microseconds. We'll also publish the overlay nobody owns, the pain hour against open satellite pass logs. Not the marketing copy, the ephemerides. Circle the minutes when two classes of platforms pass polar longitudes. Now look at the same window on their own operator forums, sanitized, polite, but human. The ones where engineers admit to minor attitude trims, cause under review, followed by cleaner than model stability for a half day. It's not a confession. It's the kind of note you write when the pain did exactly what timing predicts and nobody's allowed to print the word. To keep this honest, here's how you break our case if it's fluff. Step 1. Pull the polar seismo-acoustic pain hour from a public node will list. Step 2. Pick an independent sphere network pulse train from that week. There are 3 we vetted for custody. Overlay without waiting. If phases don't line up on the pain, walk away. Step 3. Scrape minute resolution floors from 2 deep space receivers. Mark the pain. If you don't see dense bias to polar view inside the window, tell us where we messed up. Step 4. Go to 2 public imagery portals, list frames in the pane, note flags and under review. Pattern, not accusations. Step 5. Grab open pass logs, note who crossed when, cross-reference with publicly archived anomalies, attitude trims, flagged frames, the boring no root cause. If the pain isn't written across all of it, you win. This isn't about trusting us. It's about trusting a schedule that doesn't care whether you believe in it. Calibration doesn't produce nested Type 1 frames without jitter through a narrow pane, thread lanes in 9-mile stitches and break on the line's edge, dent deep space floors exactly on pane's start, then hand you 12 hours of cleaner attitude plots. Calibration cleans its own instrument. What we're showing you coordinates many. We're careful with words, so here's the hedge you've heard all night. This stack isn't a confession. It's a set of repeatable, time-locked behaviors you can test without liking us, our faces, or our voices. Anchor, overlay, correlate, publish your raw with time codes and chain of custody notes. If it breaks, we'll run the correction on our own channel. If it holds, you won't need adjectives to explain it to anyone. You'll need a calendar. The smoking gun here isn't a craft photo or a uniform. It's a clock, ground-sourced, pain-disciplined, and a planet that answers it on time. We'll post the links. We'll take the heat. The pain will keep the beat whether anyone does the homework or not. The why now? 2026 changed the equation. We kept asking the wrong question, is the grid real? When the better one was why it moved when it did. The answer wasn't a memo. It was a crossing of curves you can chart without touching rumor. Through 2024 and 2025, the orbital shell thickened past tidy metaphors. Routers in low Earth orbit, cross-link lasers stitching constellations, synthetic aperture duty cycles rising, radar fences pulsing, and a launch cadence that stopped feeling heroic and started feeling like rush hour. The planet's accidental broadcast footprint climbed past a threshold a quiet lattice could tolerate. 2026 didn't pick a date. The math picked a slope. Look at what changed in hard numbers first. The active satellite count cleared 5 digits and kept climbing. Polar bands turned into crowded highways as operators stacked shells over shells. Crosslinks ran longer duty cycles than power models from 2 years earlier ever assumed. Conjunction alerts that once arrived as rare flurries began clustering over polar longitudes in bursts that made insurers sweat. All of that translates into one thing Vance keeps writing in block letters: noise. Not just in spectrum, noise and timing. Every transmitter, every radar chirp, every laser handshake is a tiny hand on a global metronome. Enough hands, and the beat goes sloppy. That's when the hum stopped being a background irritation and resolved into the heartbeat we've been timing. Not because someone threw a switch, because the planet did. The slope of our emissions crossed the slope of custodial tolerance, and an architecture that had the luxury of idling for decades had to retune under pressure. You could see the pivot in behavior, not in press releases. Jammers that still looked good on paper stopped moving outcomes. A March radiator dumped power into a band, and the pane slipped for milliseconds, then clicked back like it had swatted a fly. Triangles densified on schedule. Lanes stitched on the beat. Deep space floors dipped 2 to 3 decibels at pane center. That's not belief. That's a system shifting modes because the inputs demanded it. Space Force Posture made the same admission without printing the word. FI 2025 didn't blink into existence in a vacuum. It grew out of back rooms that had been watching the same curves. You don't baseline anomaly detection across missions, train an entire workforce in digital fluency, and fold commercial feeds into edge analytics because you're bored. You do it because your sky turned into a grid you don't fully control, and the only lever that still matters lives in time. The procurement trail followed: more money for resilience in polar operations, for distributed ground nodes that look suspiciously like timing ears, for AI that prioritizes windows over amplitude. The mission stayed quiet. The paper grew loud. Between them, the pane kept showing up on time. There's another curve nobody likes to talk about in public, but everybody plans against: risk of cascade. Orbital debris models are unforgiving when shells thicken. Untracked fragments behave like angry sand. One bad collision bleeds into 50, and suddenly your business case for the next dozen launches has to explain why you dimmed your own sky. In 2025, near-miss alerts clustered over polar corridors and didn't politely spread out after. The pane answered by tightening. Type 2 rails appeared over routes that couple hardest to space, 9 nautical miles per pulse, forward and back on the beat, then trimmed and released. 2 platform classes reported tiny attitude corrections in those windows and skated through half a day flatter than model afterward. Call it damping. Call it a system nudging swarms, so the spreadsheet 6 hours later doesn't make someone call you at 3 a.m. You can argue accident until you're blue. But then you have to explain why tiles went under review on consecutive panes across vendors who don't coordinate, why dispatchers padded reserve by a quiet % on pane weeks, why icing advisories cleared arcs through clear nights over rectangles crews already curved around, and why portable masts migrated a kilometer on pane eve. Denial is cheap. Geometry is expensive. In 2026, the world started paying the bill with habits that looked suspiciously like obedience to a schedule no one admits publicly. If you want the dark forest angle, you don't need aliens or scripture. You need game theory and a loud planet. In a neighborhood where strength isn't symmetrical and trust is worthless, silence isn't a virtue, it's survival. The grid's answer looks like a professional doing a job: lower outbound leakage in narrow windows, coordinate layers so phase error drops below threshold, absorb surges when conjunction risk spikes, reweave rails, and audit the nodes that matter. It isn't theatrical, it's timed, and it doesn't ask for your opinion, while it saves you from a headline you don't want to write. Why did 2026 change the equation? Because the equation changed us first. Launch cadence went from monthly to weekly to again tonight. Constellations layered until polar passes looked like woven fabric. Crosslinks hummed longer. SARS lit up strips on schedules that made the bands grumpy. Operators celebrated throughput, because that's what earnings calls demand. A lattice that had the luxury of forgiving drift for years found itself managing phase under stress. When timing is your only lever, you pull it hard. Agencies adapted with the tools bureaucracies know: policy and posture. But the real adaptation happened in muscle memory. Station techs moved delicate tasks 4 minutes off crest because their hands remembered the last flicker. Pilots curbed their urge to file perfect lines and curved without argument when the throb rose in the headset. Controllers stopped apologizing for clear night reroutes. Perimeters breathed with the pain like membranes. Nobody said the name. Everybody behaved as if the pain had become a calendar entry, not a rumor. There's a temptation to dress this up with motive, to assign a will where a function will do. Resist it. The why now doesn't require romance. It requires curves crossing and a system built to care about timing more than pride. 2026 isn't a prophecy fulfilled. It's the year the math got impolite. We raised a flare. The forest stayed dark. The metronome did what metronomes do when bands get loud. It tightened the beat and made the room dance on schedule. The road ahead: cooperation without permission. No one's handing out permission slips. The pain doesn't brief. It arrives, it holds, it changes behavior, and it leaves. So we stop waiting for a memo and build muscle memory into the world we actually live in: time first, window aware, disciplined. Start with the only thing that wins here: clocks. If you're anywhere near a hub or a maintenance route, you need a clean time base. Not my phone says. Disciplined. That can be GPS, NTP with disciplined oscillators, or cheap rubidium where budgets allow. Pair 3 simple ears at the edges of known hot zones: a masked RF sniffer, a fiber DS tap if you have access to a long run, and an inexpensive infrasound mic. Sync them to the same clock. When the pain approaches, run the dumbest protocol in science: Log the minute, the second, the instrument state, and the spike. No adjectives, just time. You don't have to stand under triangles to map the sky. A handful of crews with calibrated lenses and rigid mounts can record Type 1 geometry from safe distances. Use a standardized timing card at the head of every clip. Don't chase pretty, chase baselines. Measure legs, not vibes. For Type 2, long exposure stitching over known corridors reveals the 9 nautical mile loom when the window tightens. You don't need access badges for that. You need discipline and a clock. Link the ground to the sky with pass logs nobody can argue. Open source scripts will pull ephemerides and predict when platforms crowd the pole. Flag windows where lock is likeliest, then aim your instruments there. If your data lands on those minutes and your neighbor's does too, across hardware you don't share, you've built the first law of cooperation under a pane. Shared time that doesn't care who you are. Safety isn't decoration, it's procedure. If you work near generators or trunk lines in contraction weeks, move delicate tasks away from the narrowest window. Write it on the whiteboard. For minutes before crest, for after, hands off the finicky stuff. If you're planning a polar leg and dispatch whispers rectangles on a clear night, pad reserve without bravado. Treat invisible boxes like terrain. If your instrument skips at pain center and reconciles later, don't romanticize it. Log the minute. Move on. We need studies that respect people as much as timing respects the pain. That means pain-aware health work near maintenance zones, quiet, protected aggregate. Doctors who will tag symptoms to windows instead of turning stories into monsters. Publish curves, not anecdotes. If the pain draws a line you can see in bodies, mitigate. If it doesn't, stop scaring crews who still have to hold a wrench at 3 a.m. in the cold. Policy will lag the clock, meet it halfway. Pain-aware notices don't require classified confessions. A NOTAM-like advisory that says timing window, expect reroutes, does the job without printing Type 0. Public imagery portals can annotate temporal gaps with precise timestamps instead of euphemisms. Station managers can send maintenance advisories that are exactly what they are. Step back 4 minutes before crest. None of this demands belief. It demands calendars. Technology can learn the pain too. If your constellation depends on tight crosslinks, build window modes that lower outbound leakage without collapsing service. Pre-compute rail restitches and handovers aligned to pulse edges. If you run payloads that breathe polar air, write heartbeat-aware guidance that smooths micro-trims and logs them with a time base you'll share later. If you own ground backbones near hubs, add UPS slack and soft start logic that won't pick fights with 4-second corrections. Call it resilience if you need the grant. You and I will call it cooperation with a schedule. Culturally, retire the theater. Stop asking the lattice to explain itself. It won't. Start asking institutions how they'll live with it. Oversight can demand pain reporting without forcing anyone to admit a grid. Regulators can set standards for time tagging coverage anomalies and icing advisories. Universities can stand up pain labs that fuse RF, seismo-acoustic, and orbital telemetry on public servers with reproducible notes. Media can trade mystery for schedule. If enough of us speak in minutes instead of myths, the public will adjust faster than the memos do. Expect friction. Perimeters will harden when you get good at your job. Some feeds will go dark. Good. Diversify. Put ears on school roofs, farm silos, co-op towers. Recruit hams who have lived with UTC in their bones for 50 years. Share playbooks like open source code, diffable, forkable, improved by strangers. The lattice won't grant consent, but it can't stop 1,000 disciplined clocks. Hold a line on ethics that makes this livable. Don't trespass. Don't harass crews who didn't write policy. Don't publish coordinates that put people at risk. Do protect witnesses who log symptoms with respect. Do refuse to turn side effects into content. If you earn trust in small things, big claims won't need adjectives. A pain-aware city looks ordinary until you step closer. Dispatchers padding reserves quietly on certain weeks. Station crews who pause hands 4 minutes at the narrowest blade. Controllers who clear arcs without apology. Labs that publish pain minutes alongside plots. Schools with a mast on the gym roof and a feed you can check against the seismo-acoustic hour. None of it requires a speech. It requires people who can read a calendar and behave. Here's the heartbeat of it. We don't get invitations, so we set our own table. Time synced, open, careful. The pain will hold again. The lock will return. The mask will lower. Between those windows, we build habits into institutions and neighborhoods until cooperation is muscle memory, not protest. No permission slips. No myths. Just a planet full of metronomes learning to share a clock they didn't ask for, and choosing discipline over denial. Human moments in a planetary system. He had 30 seconds to choose, kill the array or ride the surge. A maintenance tech with a coffee he never finished, standing in a generator alcove that vibrated like a low cello when the pain settled. 2 honest lights on the board, green to stay online, amber to drop and let backup carry. Dropping meant lost data and paperwork. Staying meant pushing a finicky rack through a minute he'd learned to respect. The metallic taste arrived first, faint but real. He looked at his hand, steady enough, and at the junior he'd trained last winter, watching him like a checklist. He chose amber. The hum edged past. A wall clock skipped a beat he wouldn't notice until someone checked logs. Later, deep space floors came back cleaner. He didn't take a bow. He bought his team dinner and wrote hydrate on a whiteboard. 20,000 feet up, a captain listened to a sky that shouldn't have a voice. Dispatch had whispered rectangles with the careful euphemisms people use when they don't have permission to be precise. The night was fake clear, the kind that makes instruments look smug. He flew a line he'd flown for years until the headset carried something below hearing, a throb that felt like a suggestion. He nudged a degree, then two, felt the fuel math tighten, and landed with a number he didn't like. In his driveway, he slowed the cockpit audio and counted 6 pulses that matched the pane's center. He labeled the file icing, clear night, and didn't show it to his kids. He traced Orion for them instead. She wrote 3 lines in a notebook she never planned to keep. 1042, briefly unsteady. 1043, metallic taste. 1044, okay. She's the kind of researcher who nails moments to paper with minutes and doesn't pretend feelings are data, unless they keep happening at the same time. She'd spent a decade inside waveforms and echo coefficients. That night, a friend 2 continents away sent a 1-line message with a clip attached. Is this weird? 90 seconds of soft, regular hum from a baby monitor. The timestamp landed inside the pane she'd circled. She didn't publish it. She filed a careful report about surface returns and wrote pain in the margin of her notebook. A field mechanic learned to count without looking at a clock. Engines taught him cadence, diesel idle tied, the way a cold wrench sits in your palm at dawn. On contraction weeks, he felt the air change the way a room does before someone tells the truth. He started pausing delicate work 4 minutes before crest and 4 after, not because a memo said so, but because his hands remembered. He leaned against a rack, let the hum pass through bone, and returned to torque values that do not forgive. He didn't call it fear. He called it timing. He told the new kid, "We respect the beat," and left it there. A family in a cul-de-sac far from ice renamed Sunset Rocket Hour because one of the kids loved launches. They tracked streaks on a screen and never thought about polar corridors or nested triangles. The night the monitor caught the heartbeat, the father was on a call with a station friend who never said nausea, only maintenance interval. The clip was harmless. The timing wasn't. When the kids were asleep, he put his palms on the kitchen counter and weighed whether he wanted a life inside a story this big. Then he set out cereal bowls and made school lunches. Morning doesn't wait for metaphors. A controller likes clean screens and sentences that end where they should. She can hold 3 conversations in her head and still find space for kindness. On pain weeks, her icing advisories carried a tone that said do this, not please. Pilots didn't argue. She cleared arcs on nights that sparkled and went home with a head full of quiet decisions that never make a headline. In bed, she tried to describe her day and said it was quietly perfect, and her partner knew that meant nothing blew up because she bent the air. A contractor stood at a soft cordon that wasn't there yesterday and smiled at a man whose smile didn't reach his eyes. The sign said soil instability. He'd walked that line 10 winters. Soil doesn't turn unstable on a clear night when the pain holds, unless the world started telling the truth with polite lies. He nodded, turned around, and did his job somewhere else on the map. On payday, his non-disclosure had a new clause about temporal anomalies. He signed it and fixed a leaky faucet at home because pipes don't care about schedules. A young analyst in a room with no windows watched lines flatten where they used to breathe. She likes coffee and code and the sensation of catching a pattern an hour before someone important needs to ask if one will appear. During the pain, deep space floors dipped where the math said they would. Type 2 rails rewove a strip she'd drawn the week before on the board. She didn't need a briefing. The graph made sense. She wrote, nominal, with more satisfaction than the word deserves, and took the train. Home past a billboard advertising stars you can't see in a city. A child on the platform wore a t-shirt with a rocket. She smiled for no good reason. A flight dispatcher learned to pad reserves on weeks she never names out loud. The spreadsheet can hide a whisper of extra fuel easier than a detour. She uses the same euphemisms as everyone. Weather, icing, adjustments. Her tone used to apologize. It doesn't anymore. She found a rhythm. Don't pick fights with rectangles in clear air. Trust the captain who says the headset felt like a suggestion. File the numbers clean and go to bed before midnight. The pain rearranged her sense of what a good day looks like. It turned out a good day looks like nothing much to anyone who isn't paying attention. He runs a small observatory that scrapes the sky's bottom shelves. He used to chase meteors and satellites and never cared if a clip got 1,000 views. On pain nights, his long exposures over the Southern Ocean started coming back with weaving arcs where straight should live. He measured the stitch, 9 nautical miles per pulse, forward and back like a loom. He printed the plot, taped it to a wall, and wrote 3 words beneath it: trust the pain. He still points a lens at comets because they make him happy, but he measures rails now with a clock he didn't use to need. A station cook learned a new cadence for coffee. On weeks when the pain pinches narrowest, he stops pouring 4 minutes before crest and 4 after because he got tired of cleaning up after hands that shake for 7 minutes and stand still for the next 7. He doesn't call it science. He calls it not being an idiot. People eat better when cups don't spill. He's not waiting for a paper to tell him what he can see. A ham operator with a shack full of decades listens in a way instruments don't. He knows when the bands feel thin and when they're fat with noise. Over months, he started logging a low RF murmur cresting seconds before his neighbors typed 3 hover notes. He didn't post it for coins or clout. He printed the minutes and mailed them to a lab with a note that said, "If you care, check this." He doesn't care if anyone says his name. He cares about the clock. A logistics lead watched portable masts migrate a kilometer the night before a pain. No meeting. No memo. A convoy rolled, arrays hummed, and somebody's calendar beat hers. She built her own rule. When the pain sits on the blade, keep the cranes still and the hands fed. People thanked her for warm soup on cold nights, and never asked why the soup was always ready in the same hour. She didn't tell them. She didn't need to. A Coast Guard crew in a helicopter over water that looks like there's nothing under it felt a wobble they couldn't explain without sounding superstitious. Instruments remained polite. The pilot eased a degree outside a rectangle no chart admitted. He landed with an unremarkable report and a number on a fuel sheet that made him raise an eyebrow and lower it. He went home and slept the same. The pain isn't drama. It's 100 small competent decisions that don't make headlines. A grad student with a stubborn heart set up 3 ears on a school roof, an RF sniffer, a cheap infrasound mic, and a borrowed fiber tap from a utility that tolerates her emails. She disciplined her time base with a box she couldn't afford until an aunt wrote a check. She doesn't chase sightings. She chases minutes. Her plot is ugly and honest. The pain sits on the graph like a clean blade. She put the files in a bucket with a readme that would pass a court and emailed the link to people who won't write back. She doesn't need them to. She met the pain with a clock. A meteorologist at a regional center learned to fight her own reflexes. Her software suggested icing on 2 cloudless nights in a row over the same rectangle. She cleared the advisory with a tone that didn't ask for forgiveness and wrote, on a sticky note at the edge of her monitor, "Schedule, not weather." She isn't supposed to think like that, but her job is to keep people safe. Words are tools. She uses the ones that work. A parent in a living room far from ice turned off the monitor and sat in the quiet for a second that felt familiar and new. He didn't know what a pain was. He knew the sound in his bones. He took a deep breath and laughed at himself for taking a deep breath. He brushed his teeth. He checked the back door. He set his alarm. The pain kept its appointment whether he named it or not. None of these moments will go into procurement lines or preprints. They are receipts the pain doesn't issue, split-second choices, steady hands, extra pounds in a tank, rails that reweave, perimeters that exhale, a low hum in a crib that no one will peer review. The pain arrives, holds, does work, and leaves. 1,000 competent people behave on time. That's how a planetary system touches lives. Not with speeches, but with schedules ordinary enough to look like nothing, until you circle the minutes and realize everyone moved the same way at once. What 0 meant this time. 0 passed like a held breath. No music swell, no skyline glow, just the quiet authority of systems doing exactly what timing demands, then letting go. If you watched with a clock, it was unmistakable. If you waited for fireworks, you missed it. Here's what it meant in practice. Triangles that used to wink and drift settled into anchors without jitter and held through the pain. Corridors threaded 9-mile stitches like a loom and rewove the same strip until the blade lifted. Deep space floors dented 2 to 3 decibels along polar sight lines and returned like a hand easing off a mixer. 2 classes of polar platforms trimmed, then skated 12 hours flatter than their own models predicted. Ground audits stacked at generators and spines, lingered longer than usual, drifted a few hundred meters and stacked again, like a checklist you could feel in the bones of a building. No speeches, just consequences arriving on schedule. What did 0 change? State. Before the pain, contraction was a warning. Tighten, verify, tighten again. On the pain, contraction became a lock. Phase error driven below tolerance, layers coordinated, masks applied precisely when they mattered most. After, a new resting rate, calmer than the glide in, ready to tighten again. The behavior tells you the truth bureaucratic language won't touch. Calibration cycles relax. Locked systems hold posture, shed jitter, and act on time without calling attention to themselves. That posture showed up in small places first. Controllers stopped apologizing for clear night arcs. They just cleared them. Dispatchers padded reserves by a near-invisible % on pain weeks. Station teams moved delicate tasks 4 minutes off crest and wrote maintenance advisories that told trained eyes to step back without scaring anyone. Portable masts migrated a kilometer the night before the pain and hummed lighter loads. Perimeters breathed like membranes, flexible, timed, responsive, thickening on the white band, thinning after. Nobody said type 0. Everyone behaved like they could read a clock. The pain wrote itself into orbits and bands where physics refuses theater. That overlap of nested type 1 frames over a crowded polar track, breaking exactly on the pain's edge, wasn't a metaphor. It was coverage on command. The stitched rails above staging arcs didn't guess their 9-mile cadence, they obeyed a beat. The quieting in deep space floors wasn't mood. It was a scheduled mask that damped outbound leakage where it travels farthest. The micro-trims and half-day stability afterward weren't good luck. They were the fingerprints of coordinated tolerance across layers that usually pretend not to know each other. On the ground, bodies registered what forms still won't name. Brief metallic taste, a wall clock skipping a second and reconciling, a steadying hand on a rack until the hum eased. Not emergencies, invoices. A drone that felt control turned to syrup precisely at pain center and slid free on the second the window released. A baby monitor that hummed for 90 seconds at pain heart while deep space floors dipped and triangles held. It isn't lab-grade evidence, but the timestamp sat exactly where the map said it would. The pain doesn't ask belief. It asks whether your minutes match. 0 didn't end anything. It clarified terms. Lock isn't a finale, it's a mode you live with. The system showed it can hold geometry steady, damp bands, reweave rails, and audit nodes on cue, then stand down without wasting motion. 6 hours after, the intervals began shaving again, barely measurably. The next pain's already on calendars no one admits exist, and people who dislike being surprised will act like they've memorized the page. If you want the human translation, it's this: 1,000 small competent decisions aligned to a schedule no one prints. A maintenance lead choosing amber over green for 7 minutes, and being right. A captain curving a degree he can't justify on the radio, and landing safe with a fuel number he feels in his gut. A controller clearing icing on a sparkling night because she's learned that words can protect without confessing. A grad student publishing pain-tagged RF and infrasound spikes with chain of custody notes that would pass a court. Time is the only authority here. People who respect it get to call their day quiet. The arguments that used to feel comfortable, calibration, clutter, coincidence, look brittle against a pain that holds and makes independent systems act like they rehearsed. Calibration doesn't nest triangles without jitter through a narrow window. Clutter doesn't stitch 9-mile rails for 20 minutes and break pattern on a line. Coincidence doesn't dent deep space floors on schedule and hand you a half day of cleaner attitude afterward. You can keep those words if they help you sleep. The pain won't notice. So what did 0 mean this time? Lock. Engaged, mask applied, costs absorbed, benefits realized, quietly, precisely on time. Protection at scale that feels like pressure at the edges. A room that moves with a metronome it didn't set. And a new resting rate that says this wasn't a one-off. It was the beginning of how things will work until the slope changes again. If there's comfort, it's practical. Schedules are survivable. You don't need a new religion to live under a pain. You need a clock and the discipline to behave. For minutes off the blade for delicate work. A whisper of extra fuel when the white band sits on your leg. Pain minutes in your plots, not adjectives. Etiquette for invisible boxes. A muscle memory that stops waiting for permission and starts acting like a city that knows when the trains run. 0 meant we're past asking if. We've entered the part where how and when matter more than why. Intent remains unknowable without a seat inside the loop. Effect is logged, and on the night the pain held, the effect was simple and profound. The world answered time. It lands quietly. A clock we don't own locked the lattice, dimmed our noise, and made ground, sky, and bands move on schedule. Protective at scale, coercive at the edges, precise enough to live with. If you've got raw pains, RF murmurs, DS pips, stitched rails, band dents, publish with exact timestamps and clean custody. Join the Pain Watch map in the description, sync your clocks, and help turn rumor into reproducible plots. Subscribe if you want the next Windows calendar, playbooks, and public overlays. The pain will hold again. Meet it with minutes, not myth.